Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere golden, glowing, and ever so slightly exhausting. Imagine a landscape bathed in honey-colored light, olive trees whispering in the breeze, and a marble temple so symmetrical it makes your left brain weep with joy. You're in Delphi, the home of Apollo, the Greek god of the sun, music, poetry, archery, prophecy, and, to be honest, probably a bit too much else. The guy collects divine rolls like they're limited edition sneakers. You're walking beside him now, or rather floating comfortably through his overly bright reality. Everything he does glitters. He plucks his lyre, and the sound makes birds lay eggs in harmony. He fires an arrow, and it politely splits a fig midair. His hair, always windblown, never greasy. You kind of want to slap him, but gently, with a sponge. And yet, he's bored, because here's the thing. When you're the best at everything, you start looking for problems just to feel something. You start composing poetry about the way olives fall too slowly. You start measuring your shadow at noon to see if it's changed since yesterday. Spoiler, it hasn't. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing your sleepy corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. One morning, maybe a Tuesday, Apollo is lying in his favorite pose, one elbow on a marble bench, lyre resting across his knee, sun glinting off his triceps like it's trying to win a beauty contest. The oracle's been quiet today. Pilgrims haven't brought anything interesting. One guy offered a dried apricot and asked if he'd win his hoplite tournament. Apollo nearly fell asleep. And then it happens. The quiet clip-clop of hooves on marble, not horse hooves, slower, less confident. You glance over and see it. A cow. A very normal, very dusty, somewhat round cow. This is not a creature that belongs in Delphi. It stops at the base of Apollo's sacred steps and gives a long, low moo. A casual moo. The kind of moo that says, "I've seen things and I have thoughts." Now, for context, Delphi is a place where silence means reverence, not boredom. Birds fly quieter here. Even the wind hesitates out of respect, so when a cow, this glorified milk balloon, wanders in mooing, it's like someone dropping a tuba solo at a funeral. The priests panic, the pilgrims murmur, and Apollo blinks. Twice. Historians still argue whether the cow actually came alone or was led by a now conveniently forgotten farmer named Cleon. Fringe thinkers speculate it was sent by a rival god, maybe Dionysus, who has a weird sense of humor and no regard for sacred spaces. One even suggested the cow escaped from a temple in Boeotia where cattle were allowed to vote on community matters. Yes, really. But regardless of origin, the moment is undeniable. A divine interruption by a bovine interloper. Apollo rises slowly. You feel the heat in the air shift with his movement. Birds stop chirping. Somewhere in the distance, a grape ferments itself in fear. He steps toward the cow, eyes narrowed in celestial irritation. The cow blinks, then chews, then releases another moo, this time a little louder, a little more existential. The oracle, the revered Pythia, who's been sitting cross-legged inhaling holy vapors in a trance, suddenly jolts upright and screams. The milk rises. Silence. You could hear a leaf photosynthesize. It is, without a doubt, the most interesting thing to happen in Delphi all week. And yet, Apollo is not impressed. Because in that moment, all eyes are not on him. They're on the cow. The pilgrims are whispering, The priests are scribbling. The cow licks its nose and stares directly at the sun like it's challenging it to a staring contest. Apollo is experiencing something unusual. Not anger, not fear, not even curiosity. Jealousy. Mild, ridiculous jealousy. And that, dear sleeper, is where our story truly begins. The day the sun god, the golden boy of Olympus, found himself upstaged by a cow with zero ambition and very good timing. You don't remember the last time Delphi felt tense. Usually, the temple grounds hum with respectful stillness, crackling incense, murmured prayers, the gentle whisper of sandals across sun-warmed stone. But now, even the cicadas have stopped mid-buzz, as if nature itself is waiting to see what Apollo does next. He stands there, bronze shoulders squared, golden gaze locked on the cow like it's a rival rock star who showed up uninvited to his concert. The cow, dusty, dappled, and completely unfazed, blinks back. Somewhere behind you, a priest coughs nervously. You shuffle aside, just enough to watch the oracle twitching like she's buffering. A second ago she shouted, "The milk rises," with all the gravitas of a divine pronouncement. Now she's muttering about grassy plains and warm udders, scribbling on papyrus as if she's been possessed by a shepherd from Thessaly. Pilgrims, of course, react the way humans always do when something weird happens in a holy place. They assign it meaning immediately. Some fall to their knees. Others begin debating what kind of cow it is. One particularly excitable woman insists the cow has the exact markings of Io, the mythic cow princess Apollo once failed to rescue from Hera's jealousy. You'd tell her that story ended with flies and despair, but she's already naming the cow Bovinia the Blessed. Apollo, for his part, does not speak. His knuckles are white on the neck of his lyre. You sense him calculating. Should he smite the cow? Relocate it gently? Pretend this never happened? Instead, he clears his throat and raises his voice. This is a sacred space. The beast does not belong here. But the Pythia, still glassy-eyed and vibing with whatever cow god has hijacked her trance, raises a finger. She has come to balance the sun, she murmurs. Light burns. Milk cools. The duality is sacred. You'd think a line like that would cause Apollo to roll his eyes or at least chuckle, but instead he blinks, then frowns, deeply. Because what she said, it sounded profound, like something that could end up inscribed on a temple wall next to his greatest prophecies. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the origin of the short-lived milk and light philosophical school, whose central belief was that divine opposites must coexist, preferably in the form of dairy products and sunbeams. Their scrolls were mostly lost, save for one wax tablet that reads, "The udder is the shadow of Apollo." Meanwhile, the cow shifts slightly, stretches one back leg, and drops a massive steaming pile on the marble. A gasp ripples through the crowd. Even you wince. A priest stumbles forward with a broom, but the oracle shrieks, "Do not disturb the sacred dung." He freezes mid-sweep. See, in ancient Greece, omens came in all forms. Bird flights, rustling leaves, awkward silences. But dung? That's next level. You're now watching a group of highly educated men and women argue about whether the direction of the steam suggests a naval victory. And Apollo? He's turning red. Not metaphorically. The sunlight around him intensifies. Shadows shorten. A fig tree nearby spontaneously cooks its own fruit. You step back, just in case he decides to go full solar meltdown. Then Artemis appears. She saunters in barefoot, her deer-hide tunic flowing like she just stepped out of a woodland fashion shoot. Her bow is slung casually across her back, and her expression is that perfect blend of curious and smug that only a sibling can truly master. "Well, well," she says, eyeing the cow. "Is this your new oracle, brother?" Apollo doesn't answer. Artemis circles the cow, patting its side gently. "She's magnificent. Look at that belly, probably full of truths." She pauses. "Or hay." The crowd laughs nervously. The cow licks Artemis's hand with a long sandpaper tongue. She grins. Apollo sighs, sharp and controlled. This isn't a joke. But to Artemis it is. And to be fair, most godly sibling rivalry usually is. You remember the time she covered his entire shrine in pine needles because he mocked her for being too outdoorsy. Or the time Apollo sent all the frogs in Greece to croak her name backwards for a week. That was a weird one. Still, beneath the teasing, there's something else happening. Artemis is watching her brother carefully. She knows that look, tight shoulders, narrowed eyes, the faint twitch in his lip that means he's about to write a really passive-aggressive song. She steps close and whispers just loud enough for you to hear, "You don't have to compete with her." Apollo clenches his jaw. She's not competing. She's intruding. But even as he says it, you feel the doubt creep in. Because the cow isn't doing anything. She's just standing there, occasionally blinking and mooing, and yet the entire world has shifted slightly on its axis. Apollo, the center of this place, is no longer the story. You glance back at the oracle. She's now carving the cow's silhouette into a clay tablet, murmuring something about the four-legged wisdom. Fringe scholars have linked this moment to a surge in bovine symbolism in Delphic artwork, cows appearing on pottery, temple carvings, and even in children's riddles. One oddly preserved fresco shows a radiant sun god being serenaded by a choir of calves. You stand silently, watching the golden god of everything stare down a cow that refuses to move. You feel a breeze, the smell of wild thyme, the slow realization that sometimes the most powerful beings are undone not by armies, but by a moo. You don't really expect things to escalate, but they do, and quickly. The oracle is now on her feet, arms raised dramatically toward the cow, which still hasn't moved more than a hoof's length since its entrance. Around her, the gathered pilgrims sway and chant in awkward unison, unsure if they're participating in a sacred rite or a very elaborate livestock appreciation ceremony. Then the cow moos again, louder this time, long, soulful, as if she's reading a poem she wrote in her sleep. The oracle gasps and collapses to her knees. The voice of the pasture speaks. Apollo's temple, the holiest site in Greece, the very hub of divine wisdom, has become a barnyard opera. Apollo doesn't even blink. His face has gone from golden god annoyance to cold stone silence. You can almost hear his internal monologue, something like, "If I vaporize her now, is that a PR disaster or just good crowd control?" But then it gets worse. Because the cow approaches the oracle's sacred tripod, the three-legged stool where Pythia normally sits while inhaling the fumes of prophetic vapors. She sniffs it once. Then, with all the grace of a sleepy dog, lowers herself onto it. Yes, the cow sits on the oracle's tripod. You, Apollo, and roughly 47 pilgrims witness the moment in real time. A divine seat claimed by a chewing, cud-loving beast. Even the birds seem to hold their breath. Somewhere, a fig drops from a tree with a soft plop. The oracle begins to weep. She has accepted the burden of vision. A young priest faints. Historians still debate whether this marked the first time animal oracles were recognized formally in Greek ritual. There is surviving pottery that suggests sheep and goats occasionally gave signs, usually by kicking or sneezing at the right time, but never anything like this. Fringe archaeologists even argue that the Delphi cow era lasted a full lunar cycle, during which several accurate prophecies were, allegedly, derived from tail movements alone. You watch as the Pythia crawls toward the cow and lays her forehead on its side. O divine rumination, speak. And the cow moose again. This time it's accompanied by a surprisingly accurate fart. The wind shifts slightly eastward. A weather-worn farmer near you nods solemnly. Rain's coming, he whispers. Can smell it in the methane. Apollo's knuckles are now pressed so hard into the lyre neck, you wonder if marble can crack under divine pressure. He turns stiffly and disappears into his inner sanctum, robes flaring like a sunspot retreating behind a cloud. You drift along behind him, curious now, because you can feel it. Jealousy has sunk its golden claws in. Inside the sanctum, the air smells of cedar oil and orange blossom. Apollo paces. His footsteps echo softly on the smooth stone floor. He mutters, mostly about cows, some about Pythia. One scathing comment about Artemis's fashion sense, and then he turns to his lyre. You know that look, that I'm about to write a distrack energy. He plucks a few strings, sharp, minor chords, the kind that would wilt a tulip at 10 paces. Then he begins composing. Words spill out like molten gold dipped in sarcasm. O beast of field and chewing grace, who dared to steal the seer's place. It's both poetic and petty, which is honestly a perfect summary of Apollo. You float beside him as he sharpens the verse. He adds references to cloven hooves, digests metaphors through a hay-based lens, and crafts lines that rhyme sacred with pastured. It's not subtle, but it is catchy. Fun fact, this might be the first ever recorded instance of divine passive-aggressive poetry. Mainstream scholars agree Apollo often encoded rivalries in his verse, though this cow-specific period remains understudied. A single tablet fragment was discovered in 1882, reading, "Even hair a moose less." Outside, the chanting continues. You can hear it through the marble. Moo, moo, moo. A rhythmic reverence, like the heartbeat of rural Greece trying to muscle its way into elite theology. Apollo finishes the verse and sighs, but it's not relief. It's exhaustion. He knows he can't simply burn the cow away. Not now. Not with all these witnesses. Not with Artemis already framing the moment as a necessary balance of divine forces. And deep down, he's disturbed not by the cow's presence, but by the unsettling realization that it might not be a joke, because it's not just that the cow has taken center stage. It's how easily everyone accepted it. One day, he's the radiant god of truth and song. The next, a moo with good timing and heavy charisma has hijacked his entire temple. You drift back toward the courtyard. The cow is now chewing something floral. The oracle is beside her, sketching in the dirt. Pilgrims have begun offering little bouquets of clover and hay. Someone's painted a sun with a cow silhouette over it on a stone wall. And you? You find yourself wondering, is this what myths are? Moments when something ridiculous becomes revered simply because people need something new to believe in? You'd laugh, but you're trying to be respectful. The cow is the oracle now, after all. The sun climbs lazily over Delphi, as if even it's uncertain how to behave in the presence of this bovine anomaly. You drift above the temple courtyard, where the crowd has grown overnight. Word travels fast in ancient Greece, especially when it involves divine cows and explosive prophecy flatulence. The sacred cow lies sprawled in the morning light, chewing slowly, radiating the exact confidence of someone who knows they've already won the argument. A garland of olive branches now rests between her ears, placed there by a group of local women who swore they had visions of milk flooding the Aegean. Apollo watches from his perch atop the temple steps, arms crossed, jaw tight. You feel it. Not just jealousy anymore, but insult, as if the very concept of order has slipped its sandals and bolted. He steps forward, golden robes fluttering in the breeze, and raises his voice. The Oracle of Delphi is not a petting zoo. The cow snorts. A moment later, a little boy toddles up and pats her flank gently. Moo, he says with reverence, like he's learned a new sacred word. His parents bow apologetically. One of them offers Apollo a small wheel of goat cheese. You resist the urge to laugh. Barely. Historians still argue whether this incident marked the peak of the so-called cow cult of Delphi, a week-long episode in which the sacred role of prophecy was temporarily transferred, voluntarily or not, to a creature with a grass-based diet. Several scrolls reference a mysterious Moo priestess, possibly the oracle's apprentice, who claimed to interpret dreams based on the angle of bovine tail flicks. Today, the oracle has declared the cow is no longer just a visitor. She is a symbol, a cosmic balance. Apollo sees the world in sunlight, the Pythia says dramatically, but the cow sees it in cud and silence. Both are divine. One burns, one digests. It's not clear if she's quoting someone or just really inspired by the fumes again. You float down near the crowd. Someone selling tiny clay cows with miniature lyres. Another person has crafted a song that starts with Moo bless this mess and has exactly 2 chords. Apollo is now pacing like a caged lion, or rather a very muscular, radiant lion who's furious that the mice are worshipping cheese instead of him. It doesn't help that Artemis has returned, this time with a small deer in tow and a knowing smirk on her face. She watches the crowd like it's her favorite play. Occasionally she claps softly when someone gifts the cow a fig or composes an ode in her honor. Apollo storms over to her. She needs to leave. Artemis shrugs. Why? The people love her. You always say Delphi is for those seeking truth. She's a cow. A truthful cow. Apollo glares. Artemis leans in. You're just mad because she didn't need a golden chariot or a glowing bow to win hearts. She just stood there. And it's true, isn't it? You feel it in the tension that hums around him. The people aren't cheering for divine power right now. They're cheering for presence. Stillness. A reminder that not all wisdom shines. To make matters worse, a local philosopher named Diodoros has begun giving spontaneous lectures near the olive grove. We have long praised the eagle for its vision, he declares. But who notices the cow, content to graze? Is that not also enlightenment? Someone claps. Someone else asks if the cow is accepting disciples. A third person offers to paint a mural. Apollo mutters something unprintable in ancient Aeolian. The next morning, you find that the priests have rearranged the altar slightly. It now includes a shallow bowl of water and some alfalfa. Offerings to Bovinia, one explains. For balance. You glance at the original inscriptions. Apollo's name is still there, of course, carved deep into the stone. But now, beside it, someone has etched a small hoofprint in fresh plaster. No one knows who did it. Artemis denies it, but she's smirking more than usual. Apollo, meanwhile, has taken to composing furious poems again. You listen as he declaims one aloud. Let it be known I, the sun's flame, was not outshone by bovine fame. Her eyes may glisten, her moo resound, but I ignite both sky and ground. It's not bad, a bit defensive, and possibly a little too focused on eye-glint comparisons. Fringe scholars have pointed out this poem, later dubbed the Ruminant Rebuke, was likely composed during what they call Apollo's hay envy period, a brief time when all his verses included subtle jabs at cud chewing or slow digestion. You drift through Delphi as the sun arcs overhead. The temple is still the temple. The statues haven't moved. The incense still burns. But something has shifted. The mood is lighter. The people laugh more. The cow, after all, is a walking joke, but also a grounding presence. She doesn't pretend to have answers. She just exists. And somehow, that's prophecy enough. Apollo stands alone now, eyes closed, face turned toward the sun. He's not smiling, but he's not fuming either. You get the sense that he's thinking, maybe even reconsidering what power is. Because you don't always need thunder to move people. Sometimes a well-placed moo will do just fine. It's noon now in Delphi, and the sunlight pours down like melted gold. You hover lazily near the temple portico, the marble beneath you shimmering with heat. Apollo, ever radiant, seems unusually quiet, brooding in the shade with his lyre cradled like a wounded ego. You'd think the crowd would thin by now. Pilgrims usually come in the morning, ask their question, receive a riddle for an answer, then leave to interpret it over olives and figs. But today, they linger, drawn not to the polished wisdom of the god, but to the hypnotic stillness of the cow. Bovinia, as they're still calling her, is now lounging on a bed of laurel branches, her bulk settled like a statue. Someone's tied a small silver bell around her neck. It jingles every time she swats a fly, and each time it rings, someone gasps and writes something down. Yes, people are recording bell rings now. 7th chime since dawn, a man whispers. Surely it means something. It doesn't. But that doesn't matter. Humans have always loved patterns. We're wired to find meaning in tea leaves, bird calls, the shape of clouds. Why not cowbells? A group of teenage acolytes tries to interpret Bovinia's latest sneeze. One suggests it's a sign of divine disapproval toward Sparta. Another insists it's a blessing for bakers. A third just wants to name her high moo stress of agriculture. Apollo watches this circus with an expression so neutral, it's practically sculptural. Then the oracle does something unexpected. She stands. Her trance for once seems lifted. Her eyes are clear, her voice steady. The balance is not a replacement, she says slowly. It is a reminder. You feel the shift instantly, like the air has paused to listen. Even the cow stops chewing for a moment. The cow speaks not in riddles, the oracle continues, but in presence. Where Apollo burns, she grounds. Where he inspires, she accepts. Apollo blinks. You know he's hearing this differently than the rest. The oracle isn't siding with the cow. She's placing them on the same cosmic spectrum. It's the first compliment he's received in days. Historians still argue whether the oracle's words were spontaneous or influenced by some divine negotiation. There's no record of Zeus stepping in yet, but there is a bronze inscription found centuries later that reads, "Balance is not rivalry." Most believe it references this exact moment. Artemis leans against a column nearby, arms crossed, smirking faintly. You notice she's not mocking anymore. She's proud. Like a sister watching her brother finally realize he's not the only one in the spotlight. And that's okay. But Apollo's not quite ready to surrender. He steps forward, graceful as always, and addresses the crowd. If she speaks for stillness, I speak for motion. If she grounds you, I lift you. If her voice is silence, mine is song. There's a murmur of appreciation, a few nods. Someone even claps once, then quickly stops when they realize they're the only one clapping. Apollo continues, gesturing with the sort of flair that only gods and theater majors possess. I welcome her presence, but remember who raised this temple, who shaped your days, who gave you rhythm and rhyme. It's a good speech, poised, humble adjacent, only a little defensive. And yet, the cow responds with a sneeze so comically loud it startles 3 birds out of a nearby fig tree. The crowd erupts into laughter. Not mocking laughter, joyful, cleansing. The kind that breaks tension like thunder after humidity. Even Apollo smiles, just a little. You know what this is. This is the moment things shift. From rivalry to rhythm. From threat to theater. A priest steps forward, holding a papyrus scroll. "My lord Apollo," he says, bowing low, "might we host a contest, you and Bovinia, a duel of prophecy?" A murmur runs through the crowd. Excitement, mischief, hope. Artemis raises an eyebrow. "Oh, please say yes." Apollo doesn't speak for a moment. You see the internal struggle, divine pride wrestling with the absurdity of competing with a cow. And yet the idea is too delicious, too ridiculous, too perfect to pass up. He nods once. Very well. And just like that, the great prophecy contest is born. Fringe scholars adore this story, the Mu versus Muse event, they call it. While no official records remain, there are fragments of a children's song from the time that begins. "On the hill of gods one day, a cow and son did try to say." The rest is lost, possibly sung too close to a roasting spit. The rules are simple. Each oracle shall offer a prediction. The crowd will determine which feels more true. You drift back to the crowd as they prepare. Someone fetches incense. Another unrolls a ceremonial cloth. The cow is gently scratched behind the ears and encouraged to think deeply. Apollo readies his lyre, plucks a few notes. His jaw sets. He knows this is absurd, but he's committed now. And you're about to witness the world's strangest talent show. The sun above blazes with anticipation, and somewhere deep within Delphi's sacred soil, laughter rumbles quietly, old, eternal, and full of love for ridiculous creatures who take themselves too seriously. There's a unique electricity in the air, though not the kind Apollo usually calls down in poetic fury. This one buzzes with anticipation, like the pause before a punchline, the hush in a theater when the curtain rises. You can feel it in your bones, in the stone beneath your feet, even in the tail flicking of the very cow at the center of it all. The courtyard of Delphi has never hosted a prophecy duel before. Wars have been foretold here. Kings have received riddles that ruined them. Entire city-states have changed course based on cryptic utterances from a single woman in a trance. But today, the sacred question is, who prophesies better, Apollo or a cow? Apollo stands to the left of the sacred tripod, shining just a bit more than usual, like he's turned up the brightness out of spite. His lyre is tucked beneath his arm, and he's composing lines silently with his eyes half closed, probably rhyming destiny with cowpathy. To the right of the tripod, Bovinia the Wise, reclining elegantly on her laurels, literally. She has a daisy in her mouth and the air of someone who just woke up from a 1,000-year nap and intends to do absolutely nothing about it. The oracle steps into the center, arms raised. Let the sacred duel commence. The crowd erupts in murmurs, which the oracle immediately hushes with a raised finger and a dramatic whisper. One prophecy per oracle. Let the truth be spoken. Apollo nods, steps forward, and strums a single chord that vibrates across the stones like a heartbeat. Then, in a rich, honeyed tone, he begins. When the moon hides behind the mountain's face, a child will rise from a cursed place. His hands will build, his heart will burn, and kingdoms will in shadow turn. He finishes with a flourish, the last note lingering like incense in the air. It's got everything: mystery, cadence, even a vague geopolitical warning. The crowd murmurs in awe. One old man whispers, "Sounds like a real prophecy." Another nods solemnly. Classic Apollo, beautiful but ominous. Then all heads turn toward Bovinia. The oracle tilts her head and bows deeply. The cow will now speak. Bovinia rises, slowly, with intention. She takes 3 steps forward, sniffs the sacred tripod, looks up at the sun, and moos. Just once. A long, echoing moo, low and resonant, like the sound of an ancient horn calling out across a forgotten plain. Her tail lifts slightly. She turns, and she sneezes into a basket of fresh herbs, scattering thyme and bay leaves into the air like glitter. The crowd freezes. The oracle falls to her knees. So clear, so vivid. You blink. Was it clear? You're pretty sure it was just a sneeze. But then something happens. A child, no more than 5, runs from the crowd, eyes wide, clutching a small clay doll. "She said I would find my toy," he cries. "I just did. It was in the herbs." Gasps ripple like a wave. The priests scramble to document the incident. Historians still argue whether this was coincidence or divine orchestration. One scroll references the miraculous herb sneeze, while another simply titles the event, "The Moo That Knew." Fringe scholars claim the cow spoke in coded tail movements and that the child was merely her first successful translation. The oracle rises and proclaims, "The cow has spoken, not in words, but in truth." Her sign was direct, her result immediate. Apollo's expression darkens like a summer sky before a storm. You float closer to him, and for the first time, you catch the flicker of something deeper behind his gaze. Uncertainty. This was supposed to be fun, a spectacle, something he could win without trying. But now, even he's wondering if the cow is actually winning. Artemis strolls past him, smirking. "That was impressive," she murmurs. "Maybe next time you should try mooing." Apollo doesn't answer. The crowd begins chanting again. Not loudly, not wildly, just a soft, rhythmic chorus. Moo, moo, moo. One of the acolytes breaks a clay tablet in half to symbolize the shattering of assumptions. A woman begins weaving a flower crown. A traveling bard starts composing a ballad about Bovinia the Benevolent. And still, the cow just stands there, chewing thoughtfully, as if none of this is new to her. Apollo turns back to his lyre. He doesn't strum it this time, just holds it, like maybe for the first time. He's unsure what song he wants to play. That night, you linger beside the temple walls. The stars twinkle with indifferent calm, and the moon glows gently over the valley. Down below, Bovinia snoozes beside a fig tree. The oracle sleeps nearby, mumbling something about grass and lightning. Apollo sits alone on the temple steps, staring at the horizon. The torch beside him flickers. "Maybe," he says softly, more to himself than anyone, "she's not here to challenge me. Maybe she's just here to remind me I'm not the only light." You smile. Because for a god known for seeing the future, that's a surprisingly wise realization to arrive at late. The days pass, and the legend of the prophetic cow continues to ripple outward from Delphi like a particularly fragrant breeze. Word spreads across valleys and into distant city-states. Merchants bring tales of the Moo Oracle to crowded agoras, where philosophers wrinkle their brows and children moo at passing livestock, just in case. You hover above it all, watching how stories ferment faster than wine in summer. In Athens, playwrights add cows to their tragedies. In Thebes, a local priest claims he once had a vision involving a calf and a rainstorm. and demands retroactive reverence. Even in far-off Lesbos, a sculpture appears, Apollo in one hand, a cow in the other, both gazing thoughtfully at a single olive. Meanwhile, back in Delphi, the dynamic has shifted. The cow still reclines beside the oracle's chamber, chewing thoughtfully and farting occasionally. But Apollo? He's trying. Not in the dramatic, thunderous way he's known for. No solar flares, no dramatic declarations about destiny or flame, just quiet efforts, small adjustments. He started walking among the people more often, listening instead of just glowing at them. He blesses a child's lyre, offers guidance to a stammering priest, even gives a begrudging compliment to the oracle, something about clarity of metaphor, which she accepts like a medal. But the jealousy? It's not entirely gone. Because the cow, for all her silence and stillness, continues to gather attention. Someone's painted a mural of her beneath a crescent moon, surrounded by symbols of harvest and sleep. Beneath it reads, "In silence, we chew the truth." Apollo rolled his eyes when he saw it, but he didn't destroy it. That's progress. Today, something different is brewing. A festival. The people of Delphi, in their endless creativity and fondness for rituals, have decided to celebrate the unique coexistence of sun and cow. They're calling it the Feast of Milk and Fire. It features music, poetry, fermented goat yogurt, and a ceremonial nap beneath fig trees. You drift through the preparations. Garlands of gold and green, loaves of honey bread shaped like hooves, and dozens of tiny clay flutes that sound suspiciously like mooing when played. Apollo stands by a column, watching, not sulking, contemplating. You know that look. The gears are turning. Later that evening, as twilight paints the marble in lavender and apricot, the oracle summons everyone to the courtyard. It's time for another prophecy. This time, Apollo steps forward, not as a challenger, but as a participant. His robes are slightly rumpled, his hair casually windswept. He doesn't glow like usual. He shimmers more like someone who slept under a tree and wrote poetry in his dreams. He raises his lyre and speaks. Not all who shine must outshine. Not all who listen must rhyme. In chewing grass, in breathing slow, a truth grows soft the gods don't know. The crowd is silent for a moment. Then they cheer, not wildly, but warmly, gently, like a shared secret has been acknowledged out loud. Even Bovinia lifts her head and gives a small, approving grunt. Historians have long puzzled over this moment. Some claim it was Apollo's first truly humble poem. Others say it marked a shift in Greek theology toward balance and contrast. Fringe theorists even speculate that a wave of agrarian mysticism began here, one that emphasized rest, digestion, and animal companionship as sacred acts. Whatever the case, you know what you felt. A settling, a balance, like two stars aligning in an unexpected part of the sky. As the feast begins, people dance around small fires. Musicians play pipes shaped like horns. Children chase each other with flower garlands. Someone recites the Ballad of Bovinia in an exaggerated moo voice, which gets more laughs than it probably deserves. And in the center of it all, the cow dozes peacefully. You glance at Apollo. He's sitting cross-legged in the grass, sharing a cup of diluted wine with Artemis. They're not arguing. They're not teasing. They're just watching. He looks content. You feel something shift in the air. Subtle, like the turn of a season. Delphi is still Delphi, but it breathes easier now, less rigid, more playful. One last moment before the firelight fades. Apollo rises, walks to the cow, and gently places a golden laurel crown on her head. She doesn't react, just keeps chewing. And he smiles. You float away into the night sky, stars twinkling above you. Temple below glowing warm with torchlight and laughter. No one won. But somehow, everyone gained something. Even the cow. Morning in Delphi arrives not with thunder or trumpets, but with the soft shuffle of sandals and the sound of snoring cows. You drift over the courtyard as the first rays of sunlight sneak through cypress trees, painting golden streaks on worn marble. The feast of milk and fire has ended, but its afterglow lingers. Laurel garlands still hang from columns, clay cups are stacked in corners, and the air smells faintly of sweet herbs and charcoal. The cow, Bovinia, sleeps curled beneath a fig tree, one ear twitching rhythmically. Nearby, a priest mutters as he tries to interpret her dream snorts. Apollo, surprisingly, is already awake. You find him sitting at the edge of the temple steps, legs stretched out, lyre beside him. No crowd today, no chanting, just him and the soft coo of doves overhead. He's watching the cow. And not with disdain, not with that celestial pout he wore days ago. This is something else, something almost like curiosity. He's watching the cow, and not with disdain, not with that celestial pout he wore days ago. This is something else, something almost like curiosity. You sense it, a god recalibrating. See, Apollo was born knowing everything. The moment he arrived, he could play the lyre, heal wounds, and give side-eye that could crumble mountains. But knowing everything doesn't leave much room for surprise or learning. Until now, until a four-legged ruminant strolled into his temple and, by simply being herself, shifted the orbit of worship away from the sun. You hover closer as he reaches into a small pouch and pulls out a tablet. Wax, neatly pressed. He begins to write. Not poetry this time, not prophecy, just thoughts. Stillness teaches what brilliance forgets. Perhaps prophecy is not in the telling, but in being still enough to hear. It's not meant for anyone else. No crowd, no applause, just a god admitting something to himself. Historians, of course, never found this particular passage. It likely melted in the sun or was eaten by an enthusiastic goat. But the sentiment remains, whispered maybe into the marble beneath his feet. You look back to the oracle's chamber. Inside, she's sweeping gently, humming a tune you don't recognize. She hasn't entered a trance in days, and honestly, no one minds. People still come, but now they sit, relax, talk among themselves. Sometimes they ask the cow for a sign, but usually they just enjoy the silence. Scholars will later debate whether Delphi entered a low prophecy period during this time, or if this was the birth of reflective devotion, a practice focused less on answers and more on patience. Fringe philosophers claim the cow triggered a kind of divine mindfulness revolution, and even designed meditative breathing techniques inspired by cud chewing. Meanwhile, the oracle starts a new morning ritual. She brings Bovinia a fresh bundle of grass, places it gently before her, and recites a little poem. Grass for thought, not fire nor fight, let wisdom moo beneath the light. You drift around the temple complex, watching people adapt to the new rhythm. No one's forgotten Apollo. His altars still gleam, his songs still echo in hillside caves. But now, beside those golden melodies, are gentle sighs and small laughter, a balance. And the gods, they notice. Dionysus sends a wine jug filled with fermented barley milk. Hermes delivers a hoof-polishing kit with a note that reads, "Respect." Even Athena offers a rare nod when her owl circles above the temple, then lands near Bovinia and seems to doze off beside her. Artemis, of course, is thriving. She's started a running tally on a scroll titled, unexpected things that upstaged Apollo. And the cow has taken the top 3 spots, just beneath a beetle from last year and that one priest who accidentally discovered fire-retardant figs. Today, though, she finds her brother and sits beside him in the grass. "No liar today?" she asks. He shakes his head, just watching. They sit in silence. Then Apollo says, almost sheepishly, "I used to think divinity meant being the brightest, the loudest, the most seen." Artemis raises an eyebrow. "And now?" He shrugs. "Maybe sometimes it means stepping back, letting others shine, even if they chew with their mouths open." They both laugh, real, relaxed laughter that echoes off the temple stones. The day unfolds gently. A child brings the cow a wreath of violets. A traveling bard sings a duet of sun and silence. The oracle naps, her head resting on a stone shaped suspiciously like a hoof. And you? You float higher, watching Delphi breathe. Nothing has changed. And yet everything has. A god has learned humility, a cow has become a symbol, and an entire city has remembered that wisdom isn't always wrapped in riddles. It can also blink slowly, fart gently, and remind you to stop trying so hard. By now, Delphi has settled into a peculiar harmony, one you couldn't have imagined a week ago. A sun god and a sleepy cow. 2 oracles sharing a temple, each worshipped in their own bizarre, oddly complementary way. You drift above the courtyard as the morning unfolds. It's quieter than usual. The pilgrims aren't crowding the oracle's chamber, nor are they demanding signs from Bovinia. Instead, they sit on the sun-warmed stones, watching, waiting, not with urgency, but with ease. It's as if the cow has redefined what it means to seek truth, not by chasing it, but by grazing slowly in its general direction. Apollo walks among them now, not floating, not glowing, just walking. He stops beside a boy who's humming a tune into a seashell. Apollo listens for a moment, then hums back, subtly correcting a sour note. The boy grins. No thunder, no fanfare, just a shared moment between god and mortal, soft and fleeting as dew. You catch fragments of conversation as you glide by. "She blinked 3 times this morning. That's got to mean something." Or maybe she was just annoyed by the sunlight. That is a kind of prophecy. Historians still argue over whether the triple blink doctrine was a formal belief system or just an elaborate in-joke among Delphi locals. Regardless, for a short time, you could buy figurines with eyes painted half shut and little scrolls tucked beneath their hooves. Meanwhile, a scribe in the temple archives has begun collecting sayings of the cow, a compilation of phrases overheard during her sneezes, snoozes, and strategic tail swishes. Some are poetic, most are nonsense, all are cherished. Apollo, for his part, has started a new series of songs, not about glory, not about conquest, but about absurdity. One begins, "In golden halls I lost my fame, to cud and tail and nameless name." The chorus? A long, melodious mo. He performs it at dusk, seated on the temple steps, as pilgrims light oil lamps and settle in for the night. It's a hit. Even Artemis taps her foot in time. You float down near the oracle, who is meticulously braiding daisies into the cow's tail. She hums as she works, pausing only when Bovinia shifts or lets out a low, contemplative belch. "I used to dread the silence," she says to no one in particular. "Now I think it's where the real messages hide." She pats Bovinia gently and adds, "You've taught me more than Apollo ever did." A soft moo, possibly agreement. Somewhere nearby, a goat sneezes. 2 acolytes rush to record it, arguing whether it was a sign of good fortune or a warning about bread. That evening, under a sky dotted with stars like crumbs on velvet, a stranger arrives in Delphi. A merchant, weary from the road. He carries spices from the east and trinkets carved from coral. He kneels before Apollo's altar, whispers a prayer, then notices the cow. He stares, he blinks, then he shrugs, walks over, and places a small pouch of saffron at her hooves. For balance, he says simply. You watch Apollo from a distance. He sees the offering. For a second, you expect the old flash of irritation. But instead, he smiles, genuinely. He walks over, picks up the pouch, and places half at his altar, half at Bovinia's side. Fringe philosophers often cite this as the birth of the dual offering custom, a symbolic gesture acknowledging that wisdom can come from both fire and soil, light and cud. The stars above pulse faintly, like they approve. Later, when everyone has gone to sleep, you remain, hovering between columns, brushing against laurel leaves, listening to the deep quiet of a world that has learned to laugh at itself, and in doing so, found something sacred. Apollo sits alone once again, lyre resting beside him. He doesn't play tonight. Instead, he watches the cow breathe in her sleep, the rise and fall of her sides matching the rhythm of the night. And softly, almost to himself, he whispers, "Thank you." No reply, just the rustle of wind and the faint smell of time. But you know she heard. You rise with the sun, gliding gently above the sacred hills of Delphi, where marble glints and morning dew coats olive leaves. Beneath you, the temple complex is stretching itself awake. A few sleepy priests shuffle out of their quarters, yawning into their cloaks. Birds sing their usual chaotic morning symphony, and in the center of it all, the cow is snoring, loudly. Her nostrils flare with each exhale, and a strand of drool slowly dangles from her mouth to the temple steps. One of the junior acolytes is already sketching the drool pattern, convinced it contains clues about the future of Corinthian agriculture. You float past Apollo, who's casually seated under a fig tree, sipping watered wine from a shallow cup. He's humming, not performing, not trying to impress anyone, just enjoying his own company. His robe is wrinkled. His hair has a tiny leaf stuck in it. You've never seen him look so mortal, and it suits him. "Still here?" he asks you, not looking up. You pause, unsure how to respond. "I figured," he says with a soft chuckle. "You've seen it all now. Might as well stay for the end." But this doesn't feel like an end. More like the middle of something new. Behind him, two elderly pilgrims are arguing about which kind of cow manure is best for tomato plants. A third pilgrim interrupts to say that Bovinia's morning tail twitch matched a pattern seen during the last lunar eclipse, and therefore tomato growing is probably cursed until next week. You'd laugh, but honestly, it kind of tracks. By mid-morning, a small crowd has gathered near the eastern wall. They've erected a new shrine, just a modest stack of polished stones, each one marked with a hoof print or a Mu-inspired symbol. One stone bears a carving of Apollo's lyre, another has a stylized daisy. They're not worshiping one or the other anymore. They're celebrating the strange, happy accident of both. Historians never agreed on what to call this hybrid devotion. Some dubbed it pastoral dualism. Others simply called it the Age of Mu. Fringe scholars insisted it marked the first theological synthesis based on mutual toleration and shared lunch breaks. You glide closer to the oracle, who's standing beside Bovinia, gently brushing twigs from her back. She's speaking softly. She doesn't need to give answers anymore, she says, more to herself than anyone else. She just needs to remind us that life is strange, and sometimes that's the point. At noon, Apollo climbs the temple steps, not with grandeur, not with pomp, just quiet confidence. He raises a hand. The crowd hushes. "I have a new song," he says, "but it's not about me." Gasps. A few people faint. One priest drops his tablet in shock. Apollo tunes his lyre. The strings hum softly, like wind through tall grass. Once there was a moo, not loud, not grand, that wandered into Marble Land. She said no words, she played no part, and yet she changed a god's own heart. She ate the grass, she blinked with grace. She took no throne, yet claimed her place. As the final note lingers, a breeze stirs the laurel trees. Somewhere far off, a thunder cloud rumbles, as if Zeus himself is clearing his throat to say, "Not bad, kid." The crowd erupts, not in wild applause, but in slow, rhythmic claps, like falling rain. Even Bavinia lifts her head and gives a single approving snort. Apollo bows. You float above it all, watching as the gods and mortals mingle like equals, their roles blurred by laughter and humility. Delphi, once the shining crown of divine judgment, is now something softer, warmer. A place where wisdom grows not from fire, but from compost and contradiction. That night, as the stars return and the moon rises over the hills, you settle near the fig tree beside the cow. She's dreaming again. Her legs twitch, her ears flick. You don't need the oracle to tell you she's galloping through a field of wildflowers somewhere in the Elysian pastures. Maybe she's meeting other divine cows. Maybe she's just chasing a butterfly made of cheese. Apollo sits nearby, strumming aimlessly, humming something wordless. And for the first time in a long time, the silence of Delphi is not expectant. It's not tense. It's not hollow. It's enough. Another day unfolds over Delphi, slow as honey, warm as baked figs. You drift lazily above the temple grounds, where the sacred marble no longer shimmers with unapproachable splendor, but with the lived-in glow of a place that's breathed, laughed, and maybe mooed a little too much. Bavinia wakes with a stretch that ripples through her entire body. Her tail flicks twice, interpreted by the oracle's new assistant, Nico, as a sign of agricultural abundance. He immediately sketches it into a scroll titled Seasonal Moo Movements, a beginner's guide to cow-based forecasting. You note that the dedication page simply reads, "To her." Apollo watches from a distance, perched on the roof of the eastern colonnade like a bird that forgot it can fly. He has his lyre across his lap but doesn't strum it. Just sits there, barefoot, ankles crossed, gazing thoughtfully at the courtyard below. You float near him and catch his sigh. "Funny," he murmurs. "I thought losing the spotlight would feel like falling, but it's more like finding a different sun." Below, the morning rituals have begun. They're not what they used to be. Gone are the processions of solemn faces and neatly folded questions. Now, the temple hosts a series of open prophecy circles, where pilgrims sit cross-legged and share dreams, doubts, and wild guesses about the future while nibbling fig bread. Bavinia listens, occasionally burps, and once in a while snorts right at the perfect moment, which everyone agrees must mean something. You chuckle internally. This place used to echo with divine riddles. Now it echoes with laughter, sleepy moos, and an occasional sneeze. One priest approaches Apollo, carefully, reverently. "My lord, some are asking if you might bless the pasture." Apollo blinks. "The pasture?" The priest nods. "We're designating the southern hillside, where she naps. We thought it might be appropriate to sanctify it." You expect offense, or sarcasm. Instead, Apollo chuckles. "Of course," he says. "Let her nap in peace. Under the sun, I'll keep warm for her." And with that, the god of light officially blesses a cow's napping spot. Historians will argue for centuries whether this marked a decentralization of divine authority or merely an unexpected public relations pivot. Fringe theologians later credited the sacred napping grounds with preventing 3 minor famines and 1 emotionally dramatic grape shortage. You drift down to the courtyard, where children are placing painted pebbles at Bovinia's hooves. Each one bears a different symbol: stars, flowers, tiny lyres. One even has a painted sun wearing cow horns. It's either heresy or marketing genius. Nearby, a traveling playwright from Corinth jots notes for a new comedy titled The Moo of Delphi, which he swears will change theater forever. His lead actor? A goat with stage fright and strong vocal range. As you glide through the temple halls, you notice new decorations appearing, not just of Apollo, but of shared symbols: sun and field, lyre and clover, prophecy scroll and hoofprint. They call it the middle path, a visual reminder that divinity doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to blink slowly and chew thoughtfully. That night, the oracle hosts a new kind of ritual: prophecy under the stars. No fumes, no chants, just quiet stories told under the open sky, with Bovinia lying among the listeners like a furry, ruminating mountain of calm. Apollo joins them, not as a god, but as a storyteller. He recounts tales of love and war, of sunrises and secret songs only trees can hear. The crowd listens, breathless. When he finishes, a young girl asks, "Do you still get jealous of the cow?" Apollo smiles. "Sometimes," he says, "but mostly I'm grateful she showed up." He looks at Bovinia, who lets out a long philosophical moo. "Because she reminded me," he says, "that being worshipped is easy. Being understood is the real miracle." You float upward, past the torchlight and fig trees, past the silver-tipped columns and gleaming stars. Below you, Delphi glows, not with power, but with peace. And in that strange balance between moo and melody, prophecy and play, something sacred has been reborn. It's well past midnight in Delphi, but the air still hums with the gentle magic of a place that's finally stopped pretending to be serious all the time. You drift over the courtyard, where torches flicker in iron sconces and shadows dance across the temple walls like sleepy spirits, waving goodnight. The moon hangs heavy above Mount Parnassus, casting a pale glow on the landscape below. The trees don't rustle tonight. They sigh. Even the cicadas seem to chirp more slowly, as if giving the cow some room to dream. Speaking of her, Bovinia snores beside the sacred fig tree, her head resting on a woven mat embroidered with symbols of both Apollo's sun and her own peculiar hoofprint. Someone left her a fresh garland of mint and clover. Another offering, another little thank you. And Apollo? He's awake. You find him alone in the temple's side chamber, sitting cross-legged beside a fountain. He dips his fingers into the water, watching the ripples. No lyre, no scrolls, just a god, still glowing faintly in the dark, thinking about things he never expected to think about. You get the feeling he's reflecting on the long game, because gods live forever. And for forever, Apollo thought he knew his purpose: be the best, shine the brightest, deliver the most cryptic poetry possible. But the cow changed that. She didn't challenge him. She didn't compete. It's well past midnight in Delphi, but the air still hums with the gentle magic of a place that's finally stopped pretending to be serious all the time. You drift over the courtyard, where torches flicker in iron sconces and shadows dance across the temple walls like sleepy spirits waving goodnight. The moon hangs heavy above Mount Parnassus, casting a pale glow on the landscape below. The trees don't rustle tonight. They sigh. Even the cicadas seem to chirp more slowly, as if giving the cow some room to dream. Speaking of her, Bovinia snores beside the sacred fig tree, her head resting on a woven mat embroidered with symbols of both Apollo's sun and her own peculiar hoof print. Someone left her a fresh garland of mint and clover, another offering, another little thank you. And Apollo? He's awake. You find him alone in the temple's side chamber, sitting cross-legged beside a fountain. He dips his fingers into the water, watching the ripples. No lyre, no scrolls, just a god, still glowing faintly in the dark, thinking about things he never expected to think about. You get the feeling he's reflecting on the long game. Because gods live forever, and for forever, Apollo thought he knew his purpose. Be the best, shine the brightest, deliver the most cryptic poetry possible. But the cow changed that. She didn't challenge him. She didn't compete. That evening, as stars return to the sky, Apollo hosts a musical gathering. But this time, he doesn't sit at the center. He shares the space with flute players, poets, and even a boy with a harp made from driftwood and horsehair. At one point, the cow lets out a tremendous sneeze mid-performance. The entire gathering pauses, and then erupts in applause. You float higher, amused and oddly proud. There's a rhythm to it now. Not perfection, not dominance, but shared space, balanced absurdity. Before you drift off for the night, you spot Artemis leaning against a column, arms folded, watching her brother. Not bad, she says to you quietly. Took him a week and a cow, but he's finally interesting. She winks, then walks away, her deer trailing behind like a slightly judgmental entourage. You let yourself rise gently into the star-flecked sky. Delphi rests, not as it once was, but as it should be. Peaceful, playful, a little weird, and deeply, unmistakably wise. As the next few days meander by like a lazy river of incense and sunlight, you start to realize that Delphi is no longer a place people come just for prophecy. They come for perspective. And strangely, a lot of that perspective now comes from watching a cow stare into the middle distance while chewing with deep, unshakable conviction. You float low across the courtyard, where things have gotten comfortable. Not sluggish, but unhurried. The priests are more relaxed, the pilgrims less desperate. No one seems to mind waiting for answers anymore. They've learned to enjoy the waiting. Even Apollo has slowed down. You find him on the roof again, reclining on a woven mat of his own, arms behind his head, staring up at the clouds. Ever notice how clouds look like thoughts you forgot to have? He muses aloud. You don't answer. He doesn't need one. Below, the oracle and a few acolytes are painting something new on the temple walls. It's a mural, stylized, bright, undeniably cheerful. On one side, Apollo with his lyre, radiant and serene. On the other, Bovinia, her nose dipped in a meadow, a tiny sun tucked behind her ear like a flower. Between them, a winding path through olive groves and laurel trees. At the base of the mural, a phrase has been added. All roads chew eventually. You're 90% sure that wasn't Apollo's suggestion, but he doesn't seem mad about it. Later, a delegation arrives from Athens. Important types. Robes too clean, scrolls too crisp. They bow to Apollo and request a formal prophecy for their city's upcoming naval expansion. He pauses, thinks, then gestures to Bovinia. She'll answer. The Athenians are baffled. She's an actual cow. Apollo nods. And yet she's also a mirror. The delegation reluctantly approaches Bovinia. She licks one of their scrolls, then promptly relieves herself near the garden. They stare. The oracle steps in. She has spoken. Go with caution, for what is gained at sea may be lost in pride. The Athenians blink, nod slowly, and thank her with far more reverence than you'd expect. They leave behind a crate of olives, a goat-shaped incense burner, and a slightly panicked junior scribe. Fringe historians claim this event redirected Athenian military strategy for nearly a decade. Some even argue it prevented a disastrous sea battle by making leaders too confused to commit. One preserved scroll simply reads, "Do not question the moo knows." By now you can sense something deeper taking root in Delphi, not a revolution, but a reframing. The gods haven't changed. The people haven't stopped worshiping. But the energy is different. Less about hierarchy, more about presence. Less about divine judgment, more about divine curiosity. And Bovinia? She continues as she always has, silent, calm, and gently gassy. But her role is clear now. She is the answer to a question no one thought to ask. What if wisdom wasn't loud? What if it didn't wear gold or demand sacrifice? What if it just grazed quietly until someone was ready to listen? You pass a young boy sitting alone with a tablet, sketching a new set of temple symbols, not thunderbolts or flames, but hoof prints and hay bundles. He glances up at the cow, then whispers, "She makes me feel like it's okay not to know everything." You smile. Because really, isn't that what everyone wants? Not the perfect answer, just permission to be uncertain and loved anyway. As twilight falls and the torches flicker to life, Apollo descends from the roof. He walks the courtyard slowly, nodding to pilgrims, murmuring small blessings. Then he stops beside Bovinia. She doesn't move. He leans down and says, barely above a whisper, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not the center of the universe." She blinks. He bows. And in that single silent exchange, Delphi becomes something new. Not just a place of light, but a place of shade and stillness and quiet, cud-chewing grace. Delphi awakens once again, as it always does, though now with the gentle rhythm of a place that's learned to breathe with its mouth closed. You drift through the olive-scented air, past the worn flagstones warmed by morning light, past the ivy curling gently up the columns, and past a particularly devoted scribe who's trying to figure out if the direction of a cow's sneeze has political implications. Spoiler. It doesn't. But that won't stop them from writing a 5-scroll dissertation. Bovinia, as usual, is the center of everything and the center of nothing. She lies beneath the sacred fig tree, her jaw working in slow, contemplative spirals, like she's pondering the shape of fate itself. Around her, people whisper, sketch, sit in silence. Some leave offerings of flowers or figs. Others leave questions written on scraps of cloth, tied to her tail with trembling hope. She ignores them all. Not rudely. Just with the peaceful dignity of someone who knows the world will turn, whether or not she answers. Apollo walks by her side today. Not hurried, not brooding, just there. He watches a child braid clover into a tiny wreath. He gently retunes a musician's broken lyre. He even gives a small nod to a goat that's trying very hard to eat one of the sacred scrolls. You sense something blooming inside him. Not quite joy, not quite peace. More like an amused surrender. Because sometimes the sun doesn't need to blaze. Sometimes it just needs to shine gently while a cow eats grass nearby. That afternoon, Apollo hosts a listening hour. Not a performance, not a sermon, just a gathering. He sits in the grass beside pilgrims, next to Bovinia, and listens. People come forward. One speaks of dreams, another speaks of grief. A third simply says, "I'm tired, and I don't know why." And Apollo, god of poetry and prophecy, offers not answers, but questions. "What helps you rest?" he asks one. "What do you fear about being still?" he asks another. Then he turns to Bovinia. "What would you ask?" he murmurs. The cow flicks her tail. A leaf flutters from a tree and lands on his shoulder. "Right." He nods. "Let things fall where they may." That becomes the new motto of the temple. People carve it into the walls. They whisper it during arguments. One priest has it embroidered onto his sandals. Even the oracle, when asked about the future of Athens, simply says, "Let things fall where they may." And no one panics, because somehow the presence of the cow has rewired everyone's expectations. The point isn't control anymore, it's coexistence with fate, with failure, with weird holy cows who nap through thunderstorms. Historians refer to this period as the gentle oracle years. Artistic expression flourished. Fewer wars were predicted. More love poems were written. More naps were taken. Apollo, still very much a god, becomes something else too. A witness. No longer obsessed with being seen, but with seeing. He begins composing sun songs every morning, brief melodies inspired by whatever happened overnight. A snoring priest, a comet, a dream about fish. One morning, his melody is inspired by a single sound, Bovinia's hiccup. It's his most popular piece. Fringe scholars will later debate whether it marked the invention of minimalist divine music. One surviving scroll contains the notation for a 3-note composition titled Hic of the Oracle. It was performed across the Aegean in what would eventually become the ancient world's most unintentionally soothing "She ignores them all." Not rudely, just with the peaceful dignity of someone who knows the world will turn whether or not she answers. Apollo walks by her side today, not hurried, not brooding, just there. He watches a child braid clover into a tiny wreath. He gently retunes a musician's broken lyre. He even gives a small nod to a goat that's trying very hard to eat one of the sacred scrolls. You sense something blooming inside him. Not quite joy, not quite peace, more like an amused surrender. Because sometimes the sun doesn't need to blaze. Sometimes it just needs to shine gently while a cow eats grass nearby. That afternoon, Apollo hosts a listening hour. Not a performance, not a sermon, just a gathering. He sits in the grass beside pilgrims, next to Bovinia, and listens. People come forward. One speaks of dreams. Another speaks of grief. A third simply says, "I'm tired and I don't know why." And Apollo, god of poetry and prophecy, offers not answers, but questions. "What helps you rest?" he asks one. "What do you fear about being still?" he asks another. Then he turns to Bovinia. "What would you ask?" he murmurs. The cow flicks her tail. A leaf flutters from a tree and lands on his shoulder. "Right," he nods. "Let things fall where they may." That becomes the new motto of the temple. People carve it into the walls. They whisper it during arguments. One priest has it embroidered onto his sandals. Even the oracle, when asked about the future of Athens, simply says, "Let things fall where they may." And no one panics. Because somehow the presence of the cow has rewired everyone's expectations. The point isn't control anymore. It's coexistence with fate, with failure, with weird holy cows who nap through thunderstorms. Historians refer to this period as the gentle oracle years. Artistic expression flourished. Fewer wars were predicted. More love poems were written. More naps were taken. Apollo, still very much a god, becomes something else too. A witness, concert series. You float above the temple as dusk descends again. The mural of Apollo and Bovinia has been expanded, now showing them walking side by side into a field of stars. Below, the cow settles into her usual spot beside the fig tree. Apollo lies nearby, arm over his eyes, humming tunelessly. And the oracle? She watches it all, then whispers to you, though she doesn't know you're there. I think the future isn't a place we go to learn things. It's a place that learns from us. You smile. Because Delphi, once a beacon of mystery and fear, has become something else entirely, a place of gentle absurdity, of shared laughter, of moos and music, and of a God who learned at last that it's okay not to be the only reason people look up. Dawn, once more. But this dawn feels different. Not because the sun shines any brighter. Apollo has actually dialed back the dazzle. Not because the cow does anything unusual, though she does emit a hiccup so profound it makes a dove fall off a windowsill. No, it feels different because Delphi itself now carries a new rhythm. You float above the waking temple, noting the small changes that mean everything. The once pristine marble has gentle scuff marks from picnic blankets and children's sandals. The incense no longer burns non-stop. It's only lit when someone feels something truly needs to rise with the smoke. And the prophecy chamber? It now has a reading bench and a small woven mat labeled "Reserved for Hooves." The oracle has begun hosting daily moo meditations. It involves 15 minutes of communal silence, followed by deep breathing and a shared contemplation of whatever face Bovinia makes when someone sneezes near her. This morning, the oracle begins by asking, "What does it mean when the cow looks away?" The crowd ponders in perfect seriousness. Someone suggests, "She's reminding us to look inward." Another says, "She's dodging bad vibes." A third offers, "Maybe she saw something weird." All are accepted as equally valid interpretations. You find Apollo in the garden, watering the mint with a clay jug. He hums an old tune, one from before the cow arrived, but it's softer now, less grand, more grateful. He spots you, or maybe just senses something watching, and says without looking up, "I used to think I had to keep everything in motion. Now I know." Stillness moves too. He glances over his shoulder toward Bovinia, who is currently engaged in an intense staring match with a beetle. "She's taught me more than 1,000 hymns." He pauses, then adds with a wry smile, "Though her meter is terrible." You both watch the beetle lose the staring match and retreat with what you can only assume is quiet shame. Midday brings a surprise. A delegation arrives from Sparta. Yes, Sparta. Historically skeptical of all things cow-shaped and poetic, they march into Delphi in formation, cloak stiff, sandals sharp. The leader, a bearded man with very intense eyebrows, requests an audience with the oracle and the god. Apollo raises one eyebrow, but nods. "You're welcome." They explain that their soothsayer, a man named Dorkon, who insists on interpreting dreams through the behavior of angry turtles, has become unreliable. They seek clarity. The oracle, without hesitation, gestures to Bovinia. The Spartans look confused, deeply. Bovinia looks back, then promptly rolls onto her side and lets out a sound that is somewhere between a burp and a sigh. The lead Spartan squints. "What does it mean?" Apollo leans in. "That your wars are exhausting her." The man blinks, then slowly, impossibly, nods. "We will return with wine and fruit." They leave behind a polished bronze helmet, which Bovinia immediately begins licking. Historians mark this event as the day Sparta considered peace. And while nothing concrete was ever signed, it did lead to an entire season without any major raids. A scroll from the period includes a phrase, "Even the spear must sometimes chew." That evening, as dusk settles like a lavender blanket over the hills, Apollo and the oracle sit beside Bovinia under the fig tree. No crowd, no ritual, just the three of them, staring at the stars. You drift close enough to hear Apollo whisper, "You know, I'm glad you never said anything. Words would have ruined it." Bovinia flicks her tail. The oracle smiles. Silence is her sermon. Later, a poet named Lysandra scrawls a new prayer onto a tablet. "Grant me the wisdom to wait, the grace to graze slowly, and the courage to moo only when necessary." It becomes a hit in Rhodes and is eventually painted above the entrance to their library. As the stars brighten and the temple dims, you watch as Delphi, once the booming voice of Olympus, learns to speak in softer tones, not through thunder, not through riddles, but through rest, and one very, very patient cow. You drift gently above Delphi as morning peeks over the horizon again, its light draping everything in soft apricot gold. The city doesn't stir with the urgency of a place waiting for divine proclamation. It stretches instead, like an old cat in the sun. Everything here has learned how to move slowly, and right now, it's quiet. Bovinia is sleeping on her side, legs twitching faintly, probably dreaming of grass, or stars, or maybe nothing at all, because sometimes nothing is exactly enough. Apollo, meanwhile, is perched halfway up a hillside olive tree, not because he's brooding, but because he likes the view. Below him, pilgrims begin to gather, not in rows or chants, but scattered in clusters. Some are barefoot. Some are bringing baskets of figs. One has painted his forehead with a crude cow-shaped sun and insists it's for better energy alignment. You don't question it. The oracle steps forward with a new ritual offering, the first moo of morning. She kneels beside Bovinia, lays out a mat of fresh clover and waits. The cow yawns, then moos, a simple moo, nothing poetic, nothing thunderous, but it's enough. Everyone applauds gently, like the end of a lullaby, and that's when it happens. A man, older, with grizzled hands and a tunic stained by travel, steps forward. He drops to his knees in front of Apollo. "I have a question," he says, "not for prophecy, for understanding." Apollo blinks. "Go on." The man speaks, voice shaking. "I lost my son, in a fire, a long time ago. I prayed to you, but I never heard anything back. I didn't stop believing in you, but I stopped believing you cared." The crowd stills. The oracle exhales slowly. Even Bovinia opens one eye. Apollo slides down from the tree and steps forward. No lyre, no lightning, just a god with dusty sandals and a quiet face. "I heard you," he says softly, "but I was too busy answering louder prayers. One's about power, glory, victory." He kneels. "And that was my mistake." The man blinks, unsure whether to weep or bow. He does both, and then the cow lumbers over and licks the side of the man's face in one long, slow motion. The man laughs, a cracked, startled, healing laugh. "She forgives me," he whispers. "No," Apollo says. "She accepts you." You float above this moment, knowing it will never be recorded properly in any scroll. Too human, too messy, too real. But it matters more than any riddle. Later that day, a priest begins carving a new relief into the temple's outer wall. Not a prophecy, not a god, just a single image, a man and a cow kneeling together, faces turned to the rising sun. Delphi becomes a pilgrimage site, not for seekers of fate, but for seekers of stillness. Even visiting gods take notice. Hermes brings herds of sheep just to graze near Bovinia. Athena sends scrolls filled with questions about bovine epistemology. Hera, she sends a basket of salt licks and a note that simply reads, "Respect." You find Artemis one evening leaning against the mural of her brother and the cow. "Never thought I'd see the day," she mutters, chewing a fig. He finally stopped needing to be the only voice in the room. She nods toward Bavinia. And all it took was one extremely unimpressed cow. As night falls, a new celebration begins, the silence of the moo. It features slow music, long pauses, and the lighting of candles that flicker until they burn out without fanfare. Apollo plays only one song that night, just 3 notes, repeated like a lullaby. No words, just feeling. And when it ends, everyone stays quiet. Not because they don't know what to say, but because for the first time in their lives, they don't need to say anything. Delphi settles into a kind of rhythm now, neither dictated by the heavens, nor interrupted by omens. Just steady. It's become a place where prophecy is optional, where clarity doesn't have to arrive with trumpets, and where cows, if sufficiently majestic and mysterious, are welcome to take a nap in the middle of a sacred walkway without complaint. You drift over the valley, noticing the patterns that have emerged. At sunrise, someone always brings Bavinia fresh clover. At midday, Apollo usually walks the gardens. At dusk, a quiet song, a single note, a shared silence. It's no longer about what's divine, it's about what's enough. Today, a group of traveling scholars arrives from Rhodes. They're robed in layered linens and speak in rhetorical questions. They've heard of Delphi's cow. They're skeptical. "This is the great center of prophecy?" one asks, eyebrow raised. "Where is the flame? The trembling of the earth? The thunder in the bones?" A local priest replies without pause, "It's under the fig tree, chewing her cud." They scoff, until Bavinia stands, walks straight up to the scholar with the loudest voice, stares into his soul with an unblinking gaze, and sneezes directly on his scrolls. There's a beat of silence. Then the oracle, from a distance, says solemnly, "The scrolls were too full." The entire courtyard nods, as if this is the most profound thing anyone's heard all month. The scholar, to his credit, nods too, slowly, reverently. He doesn't speak for the rest of the visit. Historians will later debate whether this act symbolized a rejection of excess intellectualism or just an allergic reaction. Either way, it makes the scroll sneeze one of Delphi's most referenced theological metaphors. A temple in Lesbos eventually carves into its gates. Beware the overflow. Even wisdom needs breathing room. Meanwhile, Apollo continues his quiet orbit. He's no longer trying to regain the spotlight. He's figured something out, something rare for a god. That being adored is not the same as being helpful. That silence can be an act of generosity. That maybe, just maybe, a divine role can be shared without being diminished. He composes songs not to impress, but to remember. You listen to one now, strummed under his breath. She came with hooves and offered no fire, no lightning, no riddle, no towering spire. Yet in her stillness I saw more clear, a god's own voice too loud to hear. That night, Delphi holds a new kind of gathering. No altar, no oracle trance. Just a ring of lamps lit around Bavinia, who is chewing contentedly and blinking at nothing in particular. One by one, pilgrims step forward, not to ask for prophecy, but to tell her something. A woman speaks of her loneliness. A young man talks about leaving home. An old soldier lays down his spear and says, "I no longer need this." Bavinia responds to none of them. She simply breathes, present, still, listening in the way that only creatures without ego can. And somehow, that's enough. Apollo watches from a distance, arms crossed, head tilted. He smiles, not the grin of a god who's won anything, but the soft expression of someone who's realized he doesn't need to. Later, he joins the circle. He doesn't say much, just, "Thank you for waiting for me to understand." Bavinia, true to form, licks his hand once, then turns away to examine a beetle with great intensity. You rise higher now, above the torches and the people, and the cow and the god. Delphi glows, not as a beacon, not as a warning, just as a place that accepts you as you are. Confused, hopeful, loud, quiet, glowing, chewing. A place where even the sun can learn to rest. Delphi, long the thunderclap capital of divine judgment, now hums more like a lullaby. You drift slowly through the olive-silvered air, where dust motes dance in sunbeams and fig blossoms sway in the breeze. The grandeur is still here, the marble columns, the echoing steps, the gold filigree, but now it shares space with laughter, with naps, with cows. Yes, still cows, or rather the cow. Bavinia rests, as always, in her shady sanctuary beside the sacred fig tree. But today, something is different. You notice it first in the way the crowd gathers, not in awe, not in desperation, but in affection. They come not to demand answers, but to offer stories. It's become a tradition now. Moo confessionals, they're calling them. Each person steps forward, speaks not to be judged, but to be heard. They tell the cow about love lost, bread burned, lies told, fears of the future. She does nothing in return, just listens, just exists, and that's enough. The oracle, who now spends more time weaving flower crowns than inhaling fumes, presides over the gatherings with gentle dignity. She has no tongue for judgment, she says, and no teeth for punishment. Her gift is presence. This phrase is later inscribed above the entry arch to the outer temple. Her gift is presence. Apollo hears it quoted that afternoon and actually smiles. You find him standing near the edge of the temple terrace, overlooking the valley. He's not glowing, not even shimmering, just a man-shaped sunbeam resting in the wind. He speaks quietly. It's odd. I used to think silence was what happened when the world forgot me. But now I know. Silence is what happens when the world remembers itself. You nod, though he can't see you. He's begun teaching music again. Not to gods, not to kings, but to children. Simple songs, soft rhythms. He calls it listening practice. In one lesson, he holds a lyre, plucks a single string, then asks the class, "What did that note say?" A girl answers, "It said nothing." A boy adds, "But it meant everything." Apollo chuckles. Perfect. The class ends with a song titled "Soft Hoofprints on Marble." Back at the fig tree, Bavinia is receiving guests. A family has brought her a wreath made of honey cakes and wild thyme. Another group offers a carved wooden tablet that reads, "Thank you for not knowing what to say." Artemis drops by briefly, hands her brother a scroll, and mutters, "You've officially made moo-based enlightenment a trend." He reads the scroll, a letter from a philosopher in Crete who claims to have renounced talking entirely. The letter includes a drawing of a cow holding a scroll that simply says, Apollo raises an eyebrow. "Should I be concerned?" Artemis smirks. "Maybe. But also, good job." You follow them into the garden, where bees hum around the mint and priests collect parsley for the noon stew. They pass by the shrine of dual light, a new little space marked with both Apollo's sun symbol and Bovinia's tail. It's peaceful. People light candles there, not for answers, but to mark things they've let go. As evening settles, The final light bleeds across the valley like melted amber. Pilgrims begin to sing, not hymns, not chants, just old folk songs, passed down from grandmothers who claimed they once dreamed of cows that could speak in rain. You float above them as they circle the fig tree one last time. Apollo joins, and for the first time, so does Bovinia, not leading, not commanding, just walking beside them, large and slow, like a living statue of sleep and peace. The oracle declares, "This is not a farewell, this is a rhythm," and everyone understands. That night, Delphi doesn't echo with the voice of the gods. It breathes, and in the silence, it sings. You wake to dew on marble, and a chorus of birds tuning up like a rustic orchestra with no conductor. Delphi is quiet, but not in the old, tense way it used to be. The kind of quiet now is full and warm, like the silence between old friends who don't need to speak to feel understood. You drift down through golden beams to the heart of the courtyard, where Bovinia lies still as a hillock, content and enormous, with daisies tucked behind each ear. Someone's placed a wreath of soft cheese around her neck, though you suspect that may not last long. Apollo is already up. He's not pacing or composing or being dramatically radiant, just helping clean olive pits from the mosaic tiles. A new pilgrim asks if he's a groundskeeper. "I am today," he answers. It's become a thing now, the daily roles. Every morning someone assigns a new one to Apollo. Yesterday he was chief listener, the day before junior moo interpreter. He accepts each with amused grace. It's a running joke that, after centuries of fire and prophecy, the most growth Apollo ever achieved came from being told to refill the herb jugs and wipe down a cow's favorite bench. And honestly, he agrees. He's even started recording his observations in a slim, leather-bound journal titled Notes from the Quiet Side of Glory. Today's entry reads, Day 44, Cow refused to stand for Bard's song. Bard now rethinking entire career. Oracle says that's progress. You pass the garden, now grown wild with lavender, thyme, and vines curling into symbols no one planted. A young couple is kneeling beside it, speaking softly to each other. They say this place helped them reconcile after years of silence. Not because of a prophecy, but because they sat near Bovinia and watched her breathe for an hour, and somehow remembered they were allowed to be simple again. That's the thing no one expected. For Delphi to become a haven, not for great decisions, but for small reconciliations. Historians will call this the Whispering Age. Records from the period are full of soft philosophies, cow-inspired ethics, and an unusually high number of lullabies. That afternoon, a chorus of poets from Naxos performs the Ode to the Unspoken Moo. It's 4 verses of blank space and one long, unbroken hum. It receives a standing ovation. Apollo just chuckles. Finally, someone gets it. Later, the oracle reveals a new rite, the offering of the unasked question. Pilgrims are invited to write down a question they'll never read an answer to, then place it in a stone jar under the fig tree. The act isn't about solving, it's about surrendering. One of the priests adds a note that reads simply, "Why do I always need to know why?" Bovinia sneezes. The jar cracks, just slightly. Everyone gasps. Interpretation? Someone asks. The oracle shrugs. Maybe the answer was too big for the jar. That evening, Apollo and Bovinia sit side by side at the edge of the temple terrace, watching the sunset. Neither speaks. He hums, she chews, and beneath them, Delphi glows, not from torches or worship or divine approval, but from the peace of a place that has enough. You drift higher, catching the last breeze of the day. Below, the cow twitches in sleep. Apollo smiles, and all of Delphi whispers, "Let things fall, let things rise, let things be." It begins, as it always does now, with silence. The courtyard of Delphi sits quiet beneath a silver dawn, not because no one is there, but because those who are have learned to be. The sky blushes a soft coral above the mountains, and a fig drops gently from its branch without fanfare or audience. You glide low over the fig tree, where Bovinia snoozes in her usual spot, tail twitching with residual dreams. Around her, garlands hang like sleepy halos, wilted daisies, olive sprigs, one crown made entirely of bread crusts. Someone scribbled a message in chalk nearby. The universe just burped and I feel better. That feels right. A small circle forms as the morning light deepens. No horns, no hymns, just people. They sit in the grass, pilgrims, locals, even a couple of bemused goats, and Apollo. He doesn't hover above them. He doesn't shine brighter than the sunrise. He sits cross-legged beside Bovinia, fingers resting on the strings of his lyre, not playing, just touching, like he's waiting to be reminded how sound works. The oracle speaks softly. Today, we honor the journey, not from ignorance to wisdom, but from knowing to listening, from power to peace, from noise to moo. A chuckle ripples through the crowd. Even Bovinia seems to grin, though it could just be the way her jaw shifts mid-chew. One by one they step forward, not with questions, but with thanks. A baker who found his lost sister. A sailor who finally stopped dreaming of storms. A child who says with total conviction, "She taught me how to breathe slower." Apollo stands finally, lyre in hand. He plays a single note. It vibrates through the marble, through the trees, through your chest. Not loud, not dazzling, just clear. Then he says, "She didn't change the world. She reminded it how to rest." And then, in a gesture so casual you almost miss its power, he bows to the cow. She sneezes in reply. A soft wind stirs the courtyard. The fig tree shivers, and its leaves fall like quiet applause. You rise slowly above Delphi one last time. The scene below settles like an old painting. Apollo and Bovinia, side by side. A mural of opposites turned companions, of brilliance humbled and stillness revered. No temples crumble, no oracles faint. No one ascends into light, because nothing needs to change anymore. Everything is already exactly as it should be. So now, as you lie there, let the world fall away. Let go of the temples and torches, the marble and myths, and hold only this in your quiet mind. A golden god learning how to be quiet, and a dusty cow who never once needed to be anything more than herself. Imagine the way the morning feels in Delphi now. The breeze carries time and old laughter. The stones are warm from decades of footsteps, none of them rushing. The fig tree above you hums softly with bees, and in the distance you can hear the low murmur of a lyre. Just one note, repeating slowly, like the breath of someone who's finally learned to sleep. You lie under that tree now, eyes closed. The cow is somewhere nearby, shifting her weight, exhaling through her nose with gentle calm. She doesn't ask anything of you. She doesn't demand understanding. She doesn't offer prophecy. She's just there. And somehow that's the most comforting thing in the world. Let your thoughts slow. Let them curl up like resting cats in the corners of your mind. There's no riddle to solve, no destiny to fulfill, only breath, only warmth, only the story of a God who listened and a cow who didn't need to speak. Sweet